We talked about fiber. We talked about fats. We talked a little bit about protein. Let's talk about carbohydrates. Everyone thinks that I'm down on carbohydrates all the time. I'm not down on carbohydrates. I think that it's important we eat the right kind of carbohydrates. But I also think it's important that we know and that we have this understanding that carbohydrates are an unessential nutrient in the body. You'll never hear anyone say, how many grams of essential carbohydrates are you taking in per day? Or how many grams of essential glucose are you taking in a day? Because there are none. Okay? Carbohydrates are like gasoline in your car. You need a little bit to run the car, but you don't need a full tank to get maximum efficiency out of the car. Matter of fact, sometimes the car runs better when you have a very small amount of gas in the tank because it weighs less. So the human body is kind of like a hybrid car. It could use carbohydrates as a fuel source, or it could use fats as a fuel source. If you're trying to build muscle, you really want to gear yourself towards using your carbohydrates as your fuel source and using your protein and fat for building and repairing muscle. That's what you should be doing. When you diet for a competition or to lose body fat, we're not so concerned about the protein and fat all being used for building muscle. We're more, then we can kind of restrict carbohydrates more and let some of the fat you're consuming being used for energy. But in an off-season state where you're trying to actually add lean muscle tissue, which a lot of us here work out very hard in the gym to do, it's important that we take in the right amount of carbohydrates. Now, I'm just going to throw a question out there. You can, if you want to shout out the answer, you can. When do you guys think is the most important time to consume carbohydrates during the day?
After you work out.
Morning, after you work out. Two good answers. Morning, why? Because when you wake up in the morning, your blood glucose levels are very low. So we want to restore that. Okay, it's good to have a good breakfast. That's a very good thing your mom told you when growing up. What you consume for breakfast is maybe subject to debate. Post-workout, very important to restore the glycogen you used up in your muscles. Okay, what's the best post-workout meal to eat after you train? That's the question. Anyone have any suggestions? I heard some protein powders. What did you say?
Sugar.
Fast sugar. Right. Everyone seems to be in agreement. You want something that's absorbed quickly. Why? Because post-workout, your body has this, like, what we call this window of opportunity, so to speak. What it really is your body becomes more conducive to absorbing things, okay? Now, really what goes on, and I can give you a very, very complex explanation, or I can give you a very easy explanation. I think you'd prefer the easy explanation because it's going to be able to enable you to, in your mind, to understand what's going on. Imagine you just finished training. You broke down muscle tissue. What's going to happen now? Well, the most important thing that you can do post-workout, the most important thing is you want to turn on the protein synthesis factory, I call it. The factory that will start building new muscle. There's actually a switch. There's a switch. There really is a switch that needs to be flipped on. And does anyone know what flips it on? One single molecule. Leucine. Leucine flips the switch and says, okay, go on. Now, the best way to provide leucine, a lot of people will say, well, I'll just take leucine. No, the best way to provide leucine is via a complete amino acid formula. Okay, what that means is a complete protein, an animal source of protein, not a plant, because animal sources of protein are very high in leucine. Okay, very high in what we call branched-chain amino acids. Leucine is one of the branched-chain amino acids. There's two others, valine and isoleucine, but leucine being the most important. You want to consume protein sources that have high leucine residues. Okay, but you only need about a 30-gram dose of protein to get enough leucine, which is about about maybe 3 or 4 grams, to flip the switch on. Okay, once the factory's turned on, now what happens? Well, what happens now is we got to give the factory the raw materials it needs to start building the muscle. In other words, if you have a car factory, we got to give it the car parts so that the actual factory can start building the stuff. What are the car parts? Does anyone know?
Your post-workout shake?
Well, the rest of the amino acids, right? Not just leucine. Now we need the rest. We need more protein, okay? Because protein is what builds muscle, right? And we need it fast, okay? Because now the factory's starting to work. So we want to deliver a dose of about 30 to 50 or 60 grams of protein post-workout, okay? 30-gram dose of a good whey isolate will turn this factory on But for a big guy, you probably need more protein to provide the raw materials to start rebuilding the muscle that's broken down, okay? Notice I have not mentioned the carbohydrate yet, okay? The only thing that's necessary to turn the factory on and start it working is protein. Why do we need glucose? Why do we need carbohydrates post-workout?
Spike your insulin levels.
Right, well, by spiking insulin levels, what does that do? It pushes the nutrients into the muscle cell. It pushes specifically the glucose. It pushes the carbohydrates into the muscle cell. And what is that going to do? It's going to do nothing for protein synthesis, but it's going to restore glycogen stores, the stores of energy in the muscle cell. So the carbohydrate component of the post-workout shake really does nothing for building muscle, but it does a lot for restoring your body's ability to exercise tomorrow. And the ability of your body to absorb glucose is greatly enhanced right after you train. But why? Because you have more insulin receptors on the cell membranes after you train. So actually training increases the amount of receptivity to glucose. So you can absorb glucose better. And actually, here's another thing that you guys probably don't even realize. There's a receptor on the muscle cells called GLUT4 receptors. What these receptors do is they enable you to absorb glucose without insulin. Most of us know that you need the hormone insulin to absorb glucose. Well, you don't need the hormone insulin to absorb glucose through these GLUT4 receptors, which increase in number after you train. What's the advantage of that? Well, what a lot of you probably realize is if you have too much insulin release in your body, guess what happens? You get fat, because insulin can store glucose as fat as well. So